I know a lot of you wanted me to talk about this particular story coming from Good Morning America. And that is, of course, that a juror in the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial has been said to have spoken out. Now, as I said at the top of this episode of Hangouts and Headlines, I am not sure about this. I am not sure because of some of the other things that we have discussed in this space, because we saw Juror come out on TikTok, which turned out to not be a juror, which I said basically as it was happening, but that says very similar things to what we're going to analyze in this article, and very similar things to what anybody who watched the trial could say about it. In fact, one of the biggest reasons why my at least yellow flags, if not red flags, go up in this article and the quotes that are given is that it matches precisely with some of the things that we have said on the panel at Legal Bites or elsewhere around the internet. Now, that might mean we're the best analysts ever, and we can just read people's minds and we know exactly what the jury is going to say about these things. But that seems unlikely. So what we're going to talk about here are these quotes from Good Morning America, and a reasonable person would assume that ABC and GMA would have vetted this person and can just say that this is a juror. A juror in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard defamation trial said in an interview that aired Thursday on Good Morning America that when the actress cried during her testimony, the jury saw only crocodile tears, that the juror said that. But that's basically all you're going to get vis-a-vis sourcing. You're not going to get any description of what they did to verify this, even though the names are under seal, even though we have seen other people on the internet try to fake this, even though the quotes match up with one of those fake jurors already. And we basically have to take it on faith. If you hear me and think, hey, he sounds rather uncomfortable with that, I am. But let's assume for the moment, for the purposes of looking at this article, that this is in fact a juror, because honestly, we can't just disbelieve everything ever and have reasoned and useful, productive conversations about these things. So let's take a look at what this juror actually said to Good Morning America. It didn't come across as believable, he said. It seemed like she was able to flip the switch on her emotions. She would answer one question and she would be crying, and 2 seconds later, she would turn ice cold. It didn't seem natural. Here is one of the first areas where I say, yep, that is exactly what she looked like. And so, yes, it matches up with what we observed of Amber Heard while we were watching the trial. And yes, that's the human experience. It should all match up if we're all seeing the same thing. But that hasn't been my experience, that everybody sees identically the same thing. Now, I will say Amber Heard did appear to have full mastery of her emotional range. Even if she was unconvincing when she was crying, it was a little bit disturbing to watch an objection come in, have her emotions turn off like that, and then turn back on when then she was supposed to answer the question after the objection had been overruled or sustained or whatever happened in that particular instance. I agree that it seemed robotic and weird, and so I don't disagree with this juror saying that, but it is obviously something that we talked about at length again and again and again. Depp, he said, just seemed a little more real in terms of how he responded to questions. And that sincerity, I think, is also true. That's the analysis that I came to, which is that Amber Heard was presenting a different version of the world state, and that world state seemed less sincere than the Johnny Depp version of the world that he had presented. And so Johnny Depp seemed a little more real, is a perfectly valid way of talking about what we saw in that trial. The juror, one of 7 jurors during the 6-week trial, spoke exclusively to GMA and is the only juror on record to speak publicly about the case. Now, that sentence is accurate, mostly, but it is important to remember that there were at least 2 other people in that courtroom that could attest to what they thought about all the evidence that was presented to them, because there were 2 alternates that didn't make it into the jury room at all. And if you were one of these alternates and you wanted to say, hey, I'm a juror and I want to talk to Good Morning America, it's unclear exactly how GMA or ABC News would have vetted against that possibility without a list of the jurors themselves. Now, it's not the hardest thing in the world to actually go and verify this if you have somebody in the room, if you have something that you can check against, like I said earlier in the video, jury pay stubs, an identification, some instance of, I parked in this place for 6 weeks, whatever it might be, to actually try to go and dig into this question. But we just don't know what they did to verify this. And interestingly, it seems like we get better information from getting a verified sticker on a Reddit subreddit that we know exactly how those moderators go and check the identities of people, more than we get from a national news story like this one that just says, trust us. This is a juror, one of 7 jurors during the 6-week trial. When there were 9 that actually had the same position, even though 2 of them didn't participate in the deliberations, and were just expected to take it on faith. Why would you buy the other person a knife was a question that was asked very often on the panel at Legal Bites and elsewhere online. Heard's credibility was suspect throughout the duration of the trial, the juror said. And I also want to note this. They give us quotes pretty often, and in other instances, they don't give us quotes. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. That's the author paraphrasing or otherwise helping the flow of an article. But when you're reading something like this, especially when the subject matter is a specific individual that is acting as a source, this is just about the fact that this juror exists and is talking to us, always take note of when they don't give you the quote. Heard's credibility was suspect throughout the duration of the trial is not what the juror said. It said something like this, or I think it's he. I think it's confirmed that it's a male that is giving this information. He said something like this, but he didn't say this, because if he did, it would have quotes. So this is the person that's writing this article translating what this person said. And in that process, just like a game of telephone that you might have played in elementary school, you can lose some resolution on what this individual said because it's already going through one filter of the author, and we don't get to know what the quote actually is. Beside how she acted on the stand, several other factors led the jury to believe Heard was not credible, the juror said. The jury concluded they were both abusive to each other, but Heard's team failed to prove Depp's abuse was physical. Now, this is an interesting quote because the only thing that the Washington Post op-ed can be read to have said by implication that could be a problem is that Johnny Depp abused me, because the references are to domestic abuse. Now, the headline is to sexual violence. So I think that was always going to be a problem once the jury finds that that has been republished. So Amber Heard always had an issue with that headline to the op-ed. But in terms of the rest of the article, mutual abuse should, in my legal mind, actually get you out of defamation liability for counts 2 and counts 3, because all they reference is abuse in general. And if they were abusive to each other, then that should get you out of that particular equation. That could come back, I suppose, in a different context. But it doesn't seem likely to, because of that headline on the op-ed itself. They had their husband and wife arguments. They were both yelling at each other. I don't think that makes either of them right or wrong. That's what you do when you get into an argument, I guess. But to rise to the level of what she was claiming, there wasn't enough or any evidence that really supported what she was saying. And this is weird, right? This is kind of a weird locution of what the thought process would be. If you start with they were both abusive to each other, and then your quote is they had normal arguments and it didn't rise to the level of abuse, I guess, that might be how you could translate this from the juror's perspective. But what's odd about this case is that the Washington op-ed is all by implication. She isn't really saying much of anything except that Johnny Depp was abusive. And so if he was abusive, it's very difficult to square this circle. But that's the nature of talking to jurors, right? So this is one area of this article where it says, well, that actually kind of does sound like a juror, because this is the kind of reasoning that a lawyer can't anticipate. And you say, what does that even mean? I say, well, basically it means we're not using the word abusive the same way across our various sentences. And that's also kind of the human condition on this kind of stuff. Heard, the juror said, was considered the aggressor in the relationship by the majority of the jury. Now, that's interesting. Again, not a quote, but that suggests that at least some people on the jury didn't think that Amber Heard was the aggressor in the relationship, and at least thought it was mutual combat, if not Johnny Depp being the aggressor. If you have a battered wife or spouse situation, why would you buy the other person, the aggressor, a knife? If you really wanted to help Johnny Depp get off drugs, why are you taking drugs around him? And these are all questions and conversations that were brought up in the various panels. And in honesty, I didn't find the knife to be that compelling, but the jury apparently did. And you could tell that the Depp team thought the jury was having a reaction to the concept of the knife, because they took out the knife and presented it to the jury as part of their ending arguments. Heard testified she purchased Depp a large knife as a gift, which Depp's legal team presented to the jurors. And the jurors said the photographs Heard took of her ex-husband also fell flat. Although the defense used them to show Depp's decrepit state after a drug or alcohol binge, the jurors said they failed to make an impact. If you mix alcohol and marijuana, that's where you usually end up, passed out. We discussed at length that a lot of the drugs she said he used, most of them were downers, and you usually don't get violent on downers. You become a zombie, as those pictures show. And then GMA makes a good point separately. In his testimony, Depp also admitted to using cocaine, a stimulant, and Heard testified she was frequently doing the drug in her presence. Now, that's almost a counter argument to the position of where this quote is. But again, the type of drugs and what they do is the kind of conversation that anybody that watched the trial could have had, not just panelists on YouTube. It's exactly the kind of conversation that folks were having. Does that make that a jury kind of conversation? Absolutely could. It just doesn't present any information that we don't already know or anything that would really indicate to us that this is specifically someone with detailed information about what was said in that jury room. Obviously, one of the things that came up again and again was that Amber Heard taking pictures of her sleepy husband didn't actually convey what she was putting forth in her stories. Here's this horrible story, and here's a photo of him sleeping in a chair. Never really worked. It was never really congruent with what she was putting out there. That's one of the reasons why I felt her credibility was really in question. Then we've got a makeup section here. The juror also said the jury essentially dismissed all witnesses on both sides who were employees, paid experts, friends, or families from either side, which might be the case. I can certainly imagine this happening if the jury goes into the deliberation chambers and already feels like they're pretty close to coming to a conclusion, right? Where you say, okay, we're pretty close on this. Let's throw out everybody that's obviously biased in some form or fashion and see what's left in order to finish off where we're going to talk about these things. I don't know whether this would have been the case if it were a little bit more conflicted in that room and then you had to really dive into all this stuff. Certainly, if the lawyers knew that this was going to happen, that is weeks and weeks and weeks of testimony of people that are otherwise employees, paid experts, friends, or family from either side. I mean, the remainder is like the cops, maybe the actual doctors that treated these people, which might be considered employees, but probably not. It's a very limited group of people that are not employees, experts, or friends or family. And of course, the plaintiff and the defendant themselves. Also suspect were the photos that Heard's team presented that purported to show bruising on the actress's face. 2 photos presented near the end of the trial were not credible to the jury, he said. They believed the accusation by Depp's team that one photo was edited to artificially redden Heard's face to suggest bruising. It was definitely the same photo that had different lighting applied to it. Heard testified the photos looked different because of a vanity light. And GMA is presenting this in a very nonchalant fashion in this paragraph. It is 100% the same photo with a different filter or brightness or contrast or coloration put on it, down to the strands of hair. And so it's interesting to suggest that this was something that the jury kind of jumped on, and GMA actually says, yeah, Heard said it was because of a vanity light. Doesn't make any editorialization here when they have in other places in this article, but obviously it was the same photo twice. Or as the juror says, those were 2 different pictures. We couldn't really tell which picture was real and which one was not. And they mean that it's the same picture given twice. The juror also said the defense failed Heard by telling them that the actress never goes outside with makeup on, yet she goes to file the restraining order without makeup on, and it just so happens her publicist is with her. Those things add up and starts to become hard to believe, as a violation of I always go outside with makeup on is just weird. And again, this is another area where maybe this is an actual juror, because the logic here doesn't make a ton of sense. You could say I never go out without my makeup on, and yet if you're going to go get a TRO, if you're believing Amber Heard at that point in time, you don't want to just cover up the bruises that are going to show why you should get that temporary restraining order. So yes, I agree overall that Amber Heard had a publicist, had apparently tipped TMZ that she was going to go out there and have this moment with the temporary restraining order. But I don't think that the defense actually saying she never goes outside without her makeup on, which is kind of hyperbolic statement, actually would win that for me in the room. So maybe this person is a juror, still unclear. $7 million donation that never happened was a fiasco. The juror said that the 4-hour debate over the difference between a pledged donation and an actual donation ended up a fiasco for Heard. On the stand, Heard testified she never finished donating all $7 million from her divorce settlement to 2 charities because she didn't want Depp to reap the tax benefits by sending her settlements to the charities directly. She didn't donating all $7 million. She didn't donate anywhere near $7 million. Heard testified that a pledge and a donation are synonymous with one another and mean the same thing. The jury was shown video of Heard on a Dutch talk show saying she gave her donation to the charities. The fact is she didn't give much of it away at all, the juror said. it was disingenuous. And that was a very big moment in the trial. That makes sense as well. This is a clear instance where she's lying. And once you've got that in your head that she's capable of that and she's capable of using the media for that purpose, it leads to an analysis like this juror, at least as claimed by GMA, is doing. He blamed Heard's legal team for giving her poor advice, such as looking directly at the jury when responding to questions. All of us were very uncomfortable at that, he said. And this is another area where it's exactly what we were talking about. So we talked about the knife. We talked about looking at the jury. We talked about so many areas of what's been plucked out here that, quite frankly, I just don't think we're that good. And that's what's raising those yellow flags for me. He also said her team had sharp elbows versus being sharp. Which, if you're not familiar with sharp elbows, if you think about people elbowing each other out of the way, that's usually what we talk about when we talk about big-time law firms, just throwing people under the bus, hitting them with their elbows. This is a person that has some amount of business experience. It's kind of a business idiom. And having sharp elbows versus being sharp, of course, being smart. This is a person criticizing the Amber Heard legal team as effectively being mean instead of smart and effective. They would cut people off in cross because they wanted one specific answer without context. They were forcing people to just answer a very narrow question, which was obvious. So we might call controlling the witness if you're watching it on the panel. She needs better advice, he said of Heard. Publishing the 2018 op-ed in the Washington Post that defamed Depp was a poor choice, he said. If she didn't do any of this stuff with the op-eds, Johnny Depp could have helped her out in her career. They didn't leave things on a nasty turn. It turned nasty after the op-ed. That's just a wild statement. And I don't know exactly what to do with it. Yes, if she doesn't write the op-ed in 2018, maybe Johnny Depp could have helped her out in her career. I don't know. I never got the impression that that was what was happening circa 2018, but apparently this person did. We only looked at the evidence. The juror denied the jury was swayed by outside forces. He and at least 3 others did not have Twitter accounts. Some people said we were bribed. That's not true. Social media did not impact us. We followed the evidence. We didn't take into account anything outside the courtroom. We only looked at the evidence. There were very serious accusations and a lot of money involved, so we weren't taking it lightly. And then there's other quotes, I guess, that didn't make it into this article that I have seen about only some people having Twitter and Facebook and never talking to us about it, and some argument about whether they were allowed to look at those things. And in general, they are allowed to do things that don't relate to the case, right? You're allowed to go and watch a movie at home. You're not maybe allowed to watch Pirates of the Caribbean 5. You are allowed to go and check your email. You're not allowed to go research the history of Johnny Depp and Kate Moss. So it becomes a situation where you have to depend on the jury doing what they are supposed to do, not outside research on this particular case. But they weren't sequestered. They weren't barred from doing absolutely anything out there. And so this, to me, is a good answer if this is in fact the case. But it also suggests why this juror might be coming out when they are coming out, because they are getting attacked by Amber Heard and Elaine Bredehoff and their team in the public, saying they must have been corrupted by social media. They must have otherwise been looking at things outside of what they were supposed to be looking at. And this juror seems here in this answer to be saying, no, we didn't do that at all. The juror also said that no one on the jury was starstruck, which again is another line of argument from Amber Heard's team as well as the media, and that their individual celebrity never played a factor in their decision. None of us were really fans of either one of them. What they do in their personal lives doesn't affect me whatsoever. Going to the movies is entertainment. I go for the quality of the movie, the storyline, not for the acting. Now, here I would argue with this particular individual giving these quotes and say, no, the acting is part of the quality of the movie, but to each their own on that. Those are the quotes that are put forth in this article. I believe there are a couple more, as I suggested, in the videos that you might look at on this. Do check out the rest of the lawyers on YouTube to have their kind of conversations about the video. But I wanted to go over this with you. I wanted to talk about my thoughts as we went through it. Again, it is so on point with what the fake juror on TikTok said. It is so on point with what we said on the panel. I would just like absolute confirmation that this person is real. And I understand people saying ABC News, GMA, they wouldn't go and not vet this individual. I get that. I think it's more likely than not that this person probably is real because I want to believe in that process. But as you can probably tell, I'm not convinced that that process was undertaken in a good way. Not the least of which is because we're also talking about today a person that fabricated sources and things of that nature. So I would like to see it a little bit more, but I hope sincerely that it is in fact a real juror giving these quotes. So what do you think? Leave me comments. Talk to me about what you think of these quotes, what you've seen over the past 24 hours on all of this stuff, and whether or not you believe that the proper vetting process is done for a source here that they just say is a juror, and we're sure, when we have seen other people try to get into the limelight on that kind of juror status.